One quiet mind begins fighting invisible problems created by its own thoughts, discovering that the brain's endless overthinking can slowly steal peace, hope, and happiness. Morning light slowly entered the small apartment through a thin white curtain. The sunlight was soft, calm, and warm. Outside, the street was already waking up. Cars passed slowly. A distant bird chirped somewhere near the balcony. Inside the room, everything looked peaceful. But inside one mind, nothing felt peaceful. A person sat quietly on the edge of a small bed. The room was simple. A wooden table stood near the window. A notebook rested on the table beside a half-empty cup of cold tea. A clock ticked softly on the wall. Tick, tick, tick. Each sound felt louder than it should. The person stared at the floor, lost in thought again. It had started with something very small. A simple message sent the night before, just a few words. But now the mind had already created dozens of possibilities. Maybe the message sounded strange. Maybe it was misunderstood. Maybe the other person thought something negative. Maybe they were offended. Maybe they were upset. The thoughts kept moving, one after another, like a long train that never stopped. The person sighed quietly. Nothing bad had actually happened. No one had said anything negative. No problem had appeared in real life. But inside the mind, many problems already existed. The brain kept asking questions. What if something goes wrong? What if they think badly about you? What if you made a mistake? The questions repeated again and again. Outside the window, sunlight slowly filled the room. Dust particles floated gently in the warm light, but the person barely noticed, because another thought appeared. Then another, then another. The mind was always working, always searching, always analyzing. Later that morning, the person walked outside to buy coffee from a small shop at the corner of the street. The air was cool. The sky was light blue with soft clouds drifting slowly. People passed by normally. Some talked with friends, some walked their dogs, some smiled. Life seemed simple for everyone else, but inside this mind, every small moment became something bigger. While waiting in line at the coffee shop, another thought appeared. What if you say something awkward when ordering? What if the person behind you thinks you're strange? What if you stand the wrong way? The person looked down at the floor tiles. White tile, gray tile, white tile, gray tile, trying not to think too much, but the brain did not stop. The order was simple. Yes, coffee. Nothing complicated, yet even this moment felt heavy. When the cup was finally in hand, the person stepped outside again and sat on a quiet bench near a small park. Children were playing nearby. A gentle breeze moved the leaves of the tall trees. A dog ran happily across the grass. Everything looked normal, peaceful. But the mind was still busy. The person remembered something from yesterday. A short conversation, only a few seconds long. But now the brain replayed it again and again. Maybe the words sounded wrong. Maybe the tone sounded rude. Maybe the other person noticed something strange. The brain tried to fix something that had already passed. It tried to analyze every detail, every word, every facial expression, every pause. The person took a sip of coffee, but barely tasted it. The mind had already moved somewhere else. What about tomorrow? What if something bad happens at work? What if you make a mistake? What if people judge you? The future also became another problem, even though it had not arrived yet. The brain created pictures of possible mistakes, possible embarrassment, possible disappointment. The person rubbed their forehead gently. It felt like carrying an invisible weight all day. A quiet pressure behind the eyes, a tired feeling in the chest. Not because life was terrible, but because the mind never rested. Every situation became a puzzle. Every memory became a question. Every future moment became a warning. Sometimes, late at night, the person lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The room would be dark. Only the faint streetlight outside would shine softly through the curtain. That was when the thoughts became the loudest. The brain replayed old conversations, old mistakes, old, awkward moments. Things that happened years ago. moments that other people probably forgot long ago. But the brain kept them alive, as if they were still happening. "Why'd you say that?" You should have answered differently. You should have done something better. The person turned to the side in bed, then turned again. Sleep came slowly. Sometimes not at all, because the brain believed something important was happening. It believed it needed to solve every possible problem. Even the imaginary ones, even the tiny ones, even the ones that might never exist. Days slowly passed like this. Nothing dramatic happened. Life continued normally, but the mind kept creating storms inside quiet moments, and the person slowly began believing something was wrong with them. Why couldn't the brain just be quiet? Why couldn't thoughts simply pass like clouds? Why did every small thing turn into something big? The question stayed in the mind. Quiet, heavy, unanswered. But somewhere deep inside the brain, something interesting was happening. Something the person did not understand yet. The brain was not trying to hurt them. It was trying to protect them. It just didn't know when to stop, and the person had not learned how to gently guide it yet. The quiet battle between thoughts and peace continued. But slowly, something new was about to begin. A realization that would change everything. The evening sky slowly turned orange as the sun lowered behind the city buildings. Warm light stretched across the streets, painting long shadows on the sidewalks. The person walked slowly through the small park again. The same bench stood under the tall tree. The same gentle wind moved the leaves. But today felt slightly different. Not because the thoughts were gone. They were still there. The mind was still active. Still asking questions. Still analyzing small moments. But something new had appeared earlier that day. A simple idea. A thought about thoughts. It happened while sitting at the wooden table near the apartment window. The notebook was open. A blank page waited quietly. The person had written one small sentence. Why does my brain do this? The question stayed on the page for a long time. At first, the mind tried answering in the usual way. Maybe something is wrong. Maybe you are weak. Maybe you think too much. But slowly, another possibility appeared. What if the brain was not the enemy? What if it was simply doing its job? The person leaned back in the chair, watching sunlight move slowly across the wall. The brain's job is protection. That idea felt strange at first, but also interesting. Thousands of years ago, human brains learned to watch for danger, to predict problems, to notice small details that could mean risk. Back then, it helped people survive. If the brain imagined danger early, it could prepare. If it thought about problems in advance, it could avoid them. Thinking deeply once helped humans stay safe. But modern life was different. There were fewer real dangers. Yet the brain still worked the same way. Still scanning. Still predicting. Still protecting, even when there was nothing to protect from. The person looked again at the notebook. Maybe the brain was not broken. Maybe it was simply working too hard, like a guard that never leaves its post. Watching every moment, searching for threats, even imaginary ones. For the first time, the person felt something surprising, a small feeling of understanding. Not frustration, not anger. Understanding. Later that evening, the person walked through the park again. Children laughed near the playground. A bicycle rolled slowly along the path. The breeze moved gently through the tall trees. The person sat on the familiar bench, and the thoughts came again. Did that conversation earlier sound strange? What if tomorrow goes badly? What if someone misunderstands you? The usual questions. But this time something was different. Instead of fighting the thoughts, the person simply noticed them, like watching clouds move across the sky. The brain was speaking, trying to protect, trying to prepare, but maybe it didn't need to control everything. The person took a slow breath. Then another. The thoughts were still there, but they felt lighter, quieter, because now the person understood something important. Not every thought is truth. Not every thought deserves attention. Some thoughts are simply the brain practicing its old habit of protection, and habits can slowly change. Over the next few days, the person tried something simple. Whenever the brain created another worry, The person quietly asked one question: is this a real problem right now? Sometimes the answer was yes. Most of the time, the answer was no. If the problem was not real, the person gently returned attention to the present moment. The warmth of sunlight, the sound of footsteps, the smell of coffee, the feeling of breathing. The brain still spoke often, but now it felt less powerful, like background noise instead of a storm. One evening, the person lay in bed again, staring at the ceiling. The soft street light glowed through the curtain like always. A thought appeared, an old memory, something slightly embarrassing from years ago. Normally, the brain would replay it again and again. But tonight, the person smiled slightly. That was just a moment, the person whispered quietly. The brain paused. The thought faded, and for the first time in a long while, the room felt peaceful. Not perfect, but peaceful. The mind was still active, still curious, still protective, but now it had a partner. Awareness, understanding, patience. The person finally realized something powerful. Peace does not come from stopping thoughts completely. Peace comes from learning which thoughts deserve attention and which ones can simply pass by. Like clouds moving across a quiet sky, the clock ticked softly on the wall. Tick, 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 tick. But now the sound felt gentle. Not heavy, not stressful. Just a clock doing its job. Just like the brain, trying its best. Learning slowly. Finding balance again. And somewhere inside that quiet room, a mind that once fought itself finally began to feel calm. If this story helped you understand your own thoughts a little better, you can quietly support it with a like. Because sometimes the most powerful battles happen silently, inside the mind.